Welcome to A State of Mind. This is Julian Royce. Today I am speaking with Buddha Bomb. Buddha Bomb is a DJ, electronic music producer, poet, and as you hear in our conversation, a meditator. In fact, he was a student of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche and also Kanjo Rinpoche and some other meditation teachers. And I have listened to his music, in fact, danced to his music many times over the last several years. He lives in Boulder, Colorado here, and he always puts on a wonderful show. And then I had a friend of mine tell me that he was actually a student of Trungpa Rinpoche, and so I knew a little bit about his background, but he has a really fascinating life story. And it was just wonderful to get to know him more and get to hear more about his life. One of the things he said that I loved is that people naturally want to ascend or go to higher states of consciousness, higher states of being. And so there's this natural impulse in us that wants to feel good, that wants to be alive, and that wants to have bigger perspectives and see things more clearly. And he sees music and dance and movement as avenues towards that end, or as expression of those states of being. And I couldn't agree more. It was a lot of fun to get to talk to him about that. He shared with me one of his recent sets. It's playing here in the background. Links will be on the episode webpage and website, as always. The story of how Buddha Bomb came to be called Buddha Bomb was amazing and well worth listening to that part. And in editing this episode, I realized that he mentions this old master from Tibet named Longchenpa. And I didn't really react, we didn't really talk about that much in our conversation. But Longchenpa's been a huge influence on me as well, and I think part of the reason why I didn't talk more about it is just the fact that Longchenpa is so revered in the Dzogchen meditation traditions that it almost feels blasphemous to say his name or something. But I found one quote from him that I love, that I've seen popping up on the internet somehow, and that quote is, "Since everything is but an apparition, having nothing to do with good or bad, acceptance nor rejection, one may as well burst out in laughter." And without further ado, I bring you Buddha Bomb. I'm here today with Buddha Bomb, also known as James, right?
Sometimes more known as Buddha Bomb, actually.
Nice. It's a great name.
Yeah.
I've seen you play a number of times. Electronic dance music, is that how you would describe it?
Roughly. I mean, I would describe my music lately as a multi-electronic music genre with various cultural flavors. So I like to play music that has, Middle Eastern, Celtic, African, and indigenous sounds, chanting.
Oh, beautiful.
And there's plenty of beats, but not just the beat.
Not just the beat, yeah. I think last time I heard you mixed, there was some like Celtic, real Celtic sounding stuff in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the flavors that I like. And I like to mix it up. I mean, my background with DJing started on KGNU radio.
Oh, cool. And that's a local radio station here in Boulder, Colorado.
A public radio station, and I'm in my 21st year on KGNU. And on the radio, in music programs, I do different ones, but some of them are eclectic, where I play different styles, and so you can't just play, house music or techno. You have to change the flavors a lot, and then I've tended to do that in my live sets as well.
Beautiful. Yeah, there's so much music in the world today that's accessible to us. So much recorded music, so much being put out there, and it's overwhelming actually, because there's new music coming out all the time, and it's almost like, I think if you had one of those graphs that showed the amount of music being released, it would be an exponential just explosion in the last few years.
Well, it used to take a band in a large studio, and now it takes a laptop and some talent.
Right.
So there's a lot of incredible music happening all the time. And I do my best to keep up on it, but there's so much that even though I'm in the business and I'm always looking for great music, there's a lot I don't know because it's so much is happening, which is wonderful.
Well, yeah, I'm curious to hear more about your life. Like, have you been a music lover your whole life?
I have. It really started when I was 6 years old, and I got for my birthday just a tiny little turntable, a record player, we called it back then. And my first album that I got was the soundtrack to Dumbo. And Pink Elephants was something that came back later in life as well.
Pink Elephants?
Yeah, well, there's a whole musical journey and a whole life journey.
Yeah.
Pink Elephants maybe representing an altered consciousnness state.
Oh, interesting.
Which, if you watch the movie, that's what happened.
I'm going to have to rewatch the movie. I can't remember that well.
Well, they ended up, Dumbo and Jiminy Cricket ended up drinking some alcohol. And they had this altered state experience of seeing these pink elephants.
Yeah. Interesting. Those old Disney movies can be so fascinating to watch.
Yeah. Yeah, you wonder what those cartoonists were doing back in those days.
Yeah. Especially, what was it, Fantasia? Just like, I saw that when I was so young. I had no idea what was happening, and it kind of haunted me. And I rewatched it when I was like 4 or 5, 6 years old, trying to understand. And then I recently rewatched parts of it, and it's just beautiful. The music is incredible.
Yes, absolutely.
The creativity is amazing. And then you said you were a computer programmer? Is that what you...
Yeah, well, software development, computer programming has been my primary vocation in life. So I've been a programmer for over 40 years. I owned a software company in Boulder for 30 years.
Oh, cool.
And that was really how I just gravitated. It was very natural for me. I taught myself computer programming, and I was successful doing it. And I decided, after working in different software companies, and I felt I was compromised because salespeople would make promises that were not really deliverable in at least the time frame they were promised. So I started my own company, and my idea was that I would be a technical person running a technical company. And I was also the salesman.
Okay. Cool. Because one of the things you said to me in an email, I think, was that you ask for money for your music or for playing, generally speaking. Is
I do not. I mean, sometimes I get offered money, especially when it's a event where they charge money, and if they make a profit and they offer me money, I will accept it. It's not, I don't have an overabundance of money. But I also play for free often. I do a lot of benefits, and I've been on KGNU Public Radio for decades now, and that's a volunteer position. So I've done more playing music without getting paid than I have been getting paid.
Yeah. Also, obviously, money is not the motivating factor for you.
It's not, and having software as a way to, make enough money is, I'm also a music collector, so I have a vast music collection, and I'm old school. I still purchase music.
Like records?
Vinyl?
CDs?
Vinyl and CDs are my primary. I have I nobody's been able to count how many CDs I have, but it's in the 20,000 range.
Oh,
And
wow. Where do you
uh,
put them all?
I have a music studio on Lee Hill Road,
Oh, okay.
and it's wall to wall. And there's still about 20% in boxes that I don't have room for.
Oh, that's incredible.
And I have not as much vinyl, but I have several thousand records as well.
Mm, cool. Yeah. And I guess another thing I was going to ask you about is how you first came to Colorado.
Well, I was a student and a football player.
Oh, yeah.
I played high school and college football, and I played college football at a small college in Pennsylvania, Dickinson College.
Hmm.
We were the Dickinson College Red Devils, and interestingly enough, I played in high school, we were the Toms River Indians. So not exactly politically correct, but
Right.
that's what it was.
Yeah. Have they changed the name now?
I don't believe they have.
Okay.
I don't believe they have. In any case, after being in Dickinson College, and I was sort of interested in studying psychology. I was interested in the mind. Ended up doing a lot of LSD at some point. And
So what year, what time frame are we in?
we're about in 1972.
Oh, okay.
And I was starting fullback on the football team. And I actually had an experience where I did acid before a football practice. I don't think many people have had that experience. And it was pretty interesting practice.
Sounds anxiety-inducing. How was that?
It went okay. It went okay. I had a perspective, and I actually enjoyed it. And there were, football practice isn't necessarily a lot of fun. You're like have to endure a lot of difficulties in practice. But
Right.
I rather enjoyed that practice, and there were things about it that made me laugh. And then just the fact that I was doing LSD, playing football.
That's an amazing story. So
Yeah.
no one else had any idea.
No, and I didn't tell anybody, not even any of the guys, because I didn't want it being spread around.
Okay. There's a famous story of a baseball player who took LSD and then threw no-hitter.
A perfect game.
Or a perfect game.
And a perfect game means no hits, just 27 batters up and 27 batters down.
Jeez.
And they're very rare, even as many. There's thousands of baseball games every year because each team plays 162, I believe, plus the playoffs. And often there might be 2, 3, 4 years in between a perfect game. So it's...
Oh, I didn't realize it was that rare. That's amazing.
A no-hitter is not as rare.
Oh, the perfect game.
Because they might... A no-hitter could involve walks or errors where people get on base. But a perfect game is just what it says, and that is actually pretty rare. So, no, it's true that he was in a state of mind to where he was able to control the ball to such a degree that he pitched a perfect game and later admitted that he was on LSD at the time. So I didn't have...
That's amazing. I wonder, I think one of the things about something like that, it's kind of unpredictable. I don't know if you could repeat that. I don't know if he took LSD before every game, if he would have that result, but that's an amazing story.
Probably not, but I've also heard that there were a few Medal of Honor winners in Vietnam who took LSD, and they won the Congressional Medal of Honor by saving a lot of people, and they were apparently able to literally dodge the bullets because they could see them coming. So, because LSD, it puts you in a different mind space where we... sort of gloss over the world with our preconceptions. And LSD is one of the substances that can break those preconceptions down, and you experience the vivid reality. So by experiencing that directly, it's been shown that a perfect game in baseball can be pitched, and people are willing to go in front of bullets and dodge them and pull people out of a dangerous situation so that they don't get further injured. So apparently there's a number of stories like this. Yeah,
that's amazing. I haven't heard that about Vietnam War. Yeah. Well, it's becoming more and more common. I think microdosing now these days is becoming more common, where people take like a tenth of a dose or even less. And
Yeah. Albert Hoffman, who discovered LSD somewhat accidentally,
right.
lived till I think about 104 years old. And apparently, the last several years of his life, he microdosed every other day.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And I believe it had a lot to do with his longevity.
Huh.
There's photographs I've seen of him where he's with some of the trance producers, the musical trance producers, who had parties with him on his like 100th and 101st birthday and things like that. And
Oh, wow.
he didn't, the fact that he was 100 years old was hard to fathom because he had so much life in him.
That's beautiful. Yeah, he's an inspiring figure, actually.
Yeah. So, back to pink elephants.
Back to Pink Elephant.
I was very influenced by psychedelic drugs. But earlier in life, I was influenced by just questioning reality. And I grew up in a family that was, I think, very strict by today's standards of the way people bring up children. It was a quote-unquote Republican family.
Right.
Children were to be seen, not heard. And I had experiences where, and my older brother, I had an older brother who was extroverted, and I grew up being very introverted. And I was not encouraged to express myself. And I had this experience where I was just looking out the window one day, and I just started to think, why was there ever anything? Why did there have to be anything? Why do I have to be here? What if there was nothing? And I got into a state of mind where I experienced what it would be like if there never was anything. And everything disappeared. And I went downstairs, and there was a family dinner situation, and, the tables had to be set certain ways, and, we were supposed to sit certain ways, and we were supposed to eat with a knife and fork in certain ways, and so on. Like I said, it was very regimented. And I asked my parents, my brother and sister, my parents were there, and I asked the question, and I was about maybe 9 or 10 years old. I said, why did there have to be anything? Why is there anything? And I got back, oh, you don't want to think about that. That's just a waste of time. And I was just completely shut down. And they didn't ask me, well, why would you ask a question like that? Which is like what I think I would do.
Yeah, like a total lack of curiosity or questioning.
It was just that it wasn't in their frame of reference. So I had other thoughts and experiences like that. We were brought to Sunday school, and I questioned the Bible, and I was told not to question it, for example. And I said, well, how do we know that there is a God? And I was told that, no, God doesn't want you to think about that. And then I was like, well, wait a second. If there isn't a God, then there's nobody who doesn't want me to not think about it. And if there is a God who's so great and powerful that he created all of this, he probably has a big enough mind to allow me to have such thoughts.
Right.
So either way, I, at an earlier age, way before I did any LSD, I didn't buy into the conventional reality
Right.
view.
You were questioning things and asking big questions. And you were like, would you say you were like 11, 12 years old?
10, 11, 12 years old, I started to have those questions. And I didn't get any answers from Sunday school, or my parents.
And would this be in the 60s?
It would be.
Yeah.
I was born in 1952.
Okay. Yeah, that's such an amazing time period in American history where there was, I think, this very conventional way of life and then this like radical counterculture that emerged, and it's been so influential. I mean, I think some of the same dynamics you're talking about now are still happening in people's lives, but I think at the same time, these kinds of questioning, this kind of openness is becoming more common. It's more,
certainly.
maybe
But,
depends on your family or where you live, but
well, there was a lot of, I would say, paving the way of,
yeah, yeah,
what I would call the hippie generation
right.
and the music at that time. So I grew up loving music, and my father was the managing editor of the Asbury Park Press. And one of the benefits he got from
Huh.
the job was he got front row tickets to a lot of the shows at Convention Hall. And so I ended up seeing The Doors, Led Zeppelin, Iron Butterfly, and all kinds of rock groups,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
with very good seats. And I was very influenced by that music.
Mm.
And that's when I went to college. I was like a straight A student in high school. I was a football star. I got accepted to a good college, Dickinson College. I got accepted to other colleges, but I decided to go there. It was close and a good school. And I was a starting fullback my freshman and sophomore years.
Mm.
And I listened to a lot of that music, and then I started to do LSD, and it sort of came back to those experiences of experiencing what nothingness is, or experiencing the potential of nothingness, that I just saw through all the conventional reality, the hypocrisy that exists on the political level, for example, on what I consider the religious level of people saying certain things but not really living what they were saying.
Right.
And I decided to drop out. So this gets back to how I got to Colorado. Is I left college after 2 years, and I hitchhiked around the country. Spent a lot of time on the West Coast, hitchhiked up and down the West Coast, lived in Oregon, Washington. I lived in communes. I was what today you call homeless, but back then it was a lifestyle, and didn't consider it anything negative. I considered it a freedom where I could just hitchhike to somewhere, find a nature spot, and camp in the woods for a
Yeah.
couple weeks. And I lived like that, and I made money. I worked on farms, in orchards, things like that, and I learned, how to make enough money to get by. And I did that for several years, and I hitchhiked through Boulder, Colorado in, I think, sort of 92, 93. And my girlfriend was actually the one who was hitchhiking. I hitchhiked with Kathy, girlfriend of mine, for a while, and she had her thumb out, and the police actually stopped and arrested her.
Oh, no.
And it was in, I think it was in Longmont. So we ended up spending a weekend in Boulder
What did they arrest her for?
hitchhiking. It was illegal at the time.
Jeez.
And I got introduced to Boulder. I saw what it was, and it was a hippie town in Boulder in like 72, 73 when I was there.
Oh, cool.
And then later that year, and I think it was the fall of 1973, she broke up with me, and I was very brokenhearted, completely brokenhearted. She was my high school girlfriend, and she hitchhiked with me when I left college, and I was devastated. And I meditated in this friend's house for about 2 weeks, was very sad, and then I started meditating, and I did a significant dose of LSD, and I was just meditating in this house in Portland, Oregon, and just like the blacklight posters, I had this vision, this sort of blacklight vision, and the word Boston was illuminated, like this blacklight poster sign,
Boston.
Boston. And so I took that as a sign from the universe. So the next day I hitchhiked to Boston. It took me 3 days.
Jeez.
And as I got closer, people said, "Oh, you're hippie lifestyle, you should go to Harvard Square, and that's where you're going to meet other hippies and stuff like that. So I hitchhiked to Boston, and I met this other traveler like me, and we hung out. And there was a poster
Hmm.
on just on different stores. It was Dharma Arts Festival, and the very next weekend there was a Dharma Arts Festival, and Ram Dass, who I'd been reading Be Here Now when I did LSD, Bhagwan Das, Allen Ginsberg, who I had studied his poetry, and Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche all had these different events in the Dharma Festival. This is 1 week after I got to Boston.
That's perfect timing.
Yeah, so
I was going to ask you how you met Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and it's cool to hear you also met Ram Dass and Bhagavan Das.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I went to all of these events, and there was chanting. I remember Allen Ginsberg had this harmonium, and he did this singing, and there were a lot of different things that happened. And then the very last event was at Harvard, and it was a lecture by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And I didn't know anything about him, even though I had read by then some of Evans Wentz's books, which were like the early translations of Tibetan Book of the Great Liberation and Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Right. It was one of the first kind of translations, which apparently is not a very good translation in terms of the accuracy, but it's an interesting book.
Exactly. But I had read those books.
Yeah.
And then, so I went to this lecture of this Tibetan teacher on the Sunday night. I had never seen a Tibetan teacher or like a genuine Buddhist teacher up to that point. Though I was interested in doing LSD, I should just sort of back up a little bit that I had experiences where sometimes I did a lot. And I saw with clarity that achieving an enlightened state of mind was something that we could do as human beings. And so I aspired to attain enlightenment. And reading those books was sort of interesting. And anyway, so
the experience of taking LSD gave you that sense that this is possible. There's something here. There's something worth pursuing. A lot of people have some version of that story.
Yeah.
That leads to a path of meditation.
Well, I saw my mind was completely open. It was fluid. I had, this whole visual, bodily, psychedelic experience. I once did 20 hits of pure LSD, and that.
Jeez.
I mean, one thing I tell people, the cannabis is a lot better these days, but the LSD was a lot better those days.
Really? It was better quality?
Well, it was very strong.
Well, let me ask you a question about that. Someone was telling me the other day there's like a ceiling with LSD. Like if you take beyond 3 or 4, I don't know what it would be exactly, it doesn't really change that much. Like taking 20 versus taking 5 doses. I don't know if that's true.
I described it as I took 20, the finger of God entered through me. I was in this completely multi-dimensional space of seeing Krishnas and Buddhas, and it was very joyous, ecstatic, and, mind expanding. It was very visual. And I had those experiences, but then the experience would be over, and the next day I started to get a little depressed because I couldn't remain in that state of higher consciousness. And that's where I really started to look at, I did read Be Here Now. I read the Bhagavad Gita. I read the Evans Wentz's books. I even read the Bible, just trying to see how I could stay in that state of mind always, rather than only when on an LSD trip. So when I attended that lecture with Chogyam Trungpa, he was talking about how, you needed to find a discipline and stay with it rather than be a spiritual shopper. And all of a sudden, it was almost as if the spotlight was turned on me. He said, so you've been traveling around the country doing LSD, trying a little this and that. He said, taking LSD is like driving a car to go next door. He said, you should just walk, and then you see all the landscapes. And I got it. I understood what he was saying. That LSD sort of brought me to that place. But I didn't have to do LSD. I could actually learn to meditate, and I could learn how to be in that space without the drug.
That's beautiful. I mean, so it's like he was like speaking directly to you.
It felt that way when he said that, and I started meditating on a daily basis after that. So what I learned from him was about just that using the power of our mind, we can enter these altered states and actualize them in our own being. So I embarked on the Buddha's path, and that was in the fall of 73 by then.
Yeah. And so is that, I was going to ask you what led to the name Buddha Bomb. That must be.
Well, that was much later.
That's much later.
And it all started, I was doing this particular practice where it was, let's see, we're talking about the early 1990s now, where Trungpa Rinpoche had died. And I had on and off practiced a lot, and also I had went through periods where I didn't practice, and I was drinking alcohol, and I had become a computer programmer. I was sort of on that path as well. But at some point, I ran into a brick wall, so to speak, and I started practicing on a daily basis again. And I was doing this particular prostration, this meditation practice for 3 hours every night. And after practicing downstairs, and then I would go up and work on the software, because I was working on software at that time. And I turned on the radio, and it was KGNU, and they were playing this music I had never heard before. It was really cool. So I called the radio station. I said, "Hey, what is that music you're playing?" He said, "Oh, man, that's techno." I said, "Techno, what's that?" And it was like 1991.
Oh, wow.
And so he gave me this rundown, and he threw out some names. He said, "Well, check out The Orb and check out Orbital," and he threw out a few names. So I went to the record store, and I started collecting electronic music from that experience. And all during the 90s, I collected electronic music, and I developed a software application that I marketed all across the United States and internationally. I sold copies in Australia. I was there 7 times. And I did a lot of traveling, and when I did traveling, I would also collect electronic music. And I didn't even know any other DJs, and I wasn't going to raves yet at that point. And then I did this trip in 1997 to Australia. In 98, went there 2 years in a row. And then when I came back, actually it was in the December of 1998, on a Saturday night, I was listening to this show called Electronic Air on KGNU radio, and they were playing what I now know as psytrance, psychedelic trance, and I really resonated with it. So I called the station. I talked to the host of the show, and I told him, "Hey, I've been traveling around. I collected a lot of electronic music." And he said, "Well, why don't you bring some of your music down and be my guest the next month?"
Oh, cool.
So I went to KGNU the next month and brought some of the music, and they played some of it, and I talked about how I've been traveling around the world and collecting electronic music. And, from that, and then I bought a case of beer, and, we hung out and we partied, and then I became really close friends with those guys, and they taught me some DJing. And then I decided I wanted to be a DJ, and so I went through the radio classes at KGNU, and these guys were teaching me about how to DJ from their perspective, and then I learned. And during that, that was early in 99, I was I realized I had to come up with a DJ name, because the first DJs I met were E23, Cause, and Matter. So 3, and then there were other DJs, and they all had a DJ name. So I went to this Buddhist lawn party, and it was early spring of 1999, and I had mentioned to somebody that, oh, I'm, been getting into electronic music. I'm learning how to DJ, but I'm trying to come up with my DJ name. So it was a lawn party, and everybody was drinking margaritas. And somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, man, you want to do a bong hit?" And I had had a couple margaritas, and I was, sure, what the heck. And so we kind of went down in these steps that was a little bit lower than the lawn, where everybody was sort of in this circle drinking margaritas. And so I did this bong hit, but I maybe did it with too much alacrity, and I took a deep thing, and then I breathed it out, and it just filled up this lawn with this this weed smoke. And these people looked, and they saw me. They saw this smoke coming out of me, and they had been talking, unbeknownst to me, about, hey, Jim's. They call me Jim Jobson. He's coming up. He wants to be a DJ, and we have to come up with it. Let's figure out his DJ name. They were playing this game, and this one person looked at and pointed at me and said, "I know his DJ name. It's Buddha Bong, Bong." And so I was like, Buddha Bong, okay. And so I had one of my first shows on KGNU radio the next week. And so I went on the air and I said, yeah, this is Buddha Bong, and, I'm going to play this and that. And then when I stopped talking, I put on some music. I got a phone call, and this woman answered the phone. I said, KGNU radio. She said, "Did you say you're Buddha Bomb? That's the most incredible name I've ever heard, Buddha Bomb." And at that point, I just saw all this imagery of what would a Buddha Bomb be. And it was this very psychedelic of this consciousness explosion that would go through the world. And at that moment, I realized, that's my real DJ name. I'm Buddha Bomb. So I said, yes, I am Buddha Bomb.
Oh, wow.
And then I've been Buddha Bomb ever since.
It's a beautiful story.
Yeah,
I'm glad I asked. I like how it's like you're waiting for the world to tell you something. Like you didn't think about it yourself exactly. It kind of came organically. And it's an interesting name. Someone the other day, I was like, I'm doing a podcast with Buddha Bomb. They're like, I don't get it. Bombs are like war, and Buddha's for peace. But I never thought about it that way. I thought about it like what you described, like an enlightenment bomb that like wakes people up.
Yeah, exactly. And well, there's also the expression of, that's the bomb.
Right.
And so there's a chant, who the bomb? Buddha Bomb.
There you go. Well, I kind of have, in some ways, something of a similar story where I got really into meditation and I was studying Buddhism, and then later in life got more into electronic music and saw that potential to take you out of your ordinary discursive thinking to a more embodied experience, a more connective experience, bringing together movement and dance and music. And so I think it's a beautiful thing. I feel like it's a growing phenomena, like people discovering spiritual experiences like on the dance floor in that way, because part of it maybe is just when the sound, the bass, like takes over your whole field, your whole sensory field, and you're immersed in that.
Yeah. Well, one of my catchphrases is music to transform consciousness. And music does transform consciousness. And it has a lot of power. And the shamans used a repetitive drum beat to bring people into trance states, and that has gone on for millennium. So that's entrainment, where you get your heartbeat, your breathing gets entrained to an external source, in this case, a beat. Except now we have subwoofers.
Right.
So the whole notion is that by entraining the dance floor, then people go into trance states, and I have many anecdotes of people saying that to me. So I do that with that intention.
Wow.
And I go through this cultural journey when I play a set of also a chakra journey, where I will put in didgeridoos and like sort of start with root chakra and then go up through the chakras intentionally to bring people into these very powerful states by using the music. And this situation has evolved. I rarely do psychedelic drugs anymore, and I don't need to because I meditate. And then also the music has a lot of power. Like I have a difficult time after I play a set of people come up and introduce themselves, like remembering conventional names and things like that,
Right.
because I'm in an altered state. It's that potent. The
Absolutely, that makes
music
sense to
has
me.
that
Yeah.
power. And so I see my role as a facilitator to help assist travelers to get to that state. And I approach every set with that's my intention.
That's beautiful. So you feel like can you speak more about the chakras? Like a different kind of sound would bring you to that energetic center in your body?
Well, sure. Well, the root chakra is very low, like I find like didgeridoos and sort of low chanting is something that can just be very grounding and bring you down and just go up through the chakras where, the heart chakras, there's more melodic, sort of heart opening sounds. The solar plexus is where I put it, the root chakra, and then the solar plexus is a very bass heavy sounds. And so you can actually feel it in your gut
Right.
is the solar plexus. And then the heart chakra is very melodic and uplifting. And then the throat chakra, I will put in some Tibetan chanting and different types of voice, sometimes female, sometimes male. I will sometimes alternate them in songs. And the third eye chakra, I usually will have, that's where I put in most of the music I play doesn't have lyrics, very rarely. But there might be, just one or two conscious statements, like a Terence McKenna about opening our mind and how consciousness is everything, mind is everything. So I'll do a third eye just to get into that space. And then a crown chakra might be like more like coming down, like indigenous chanting. So it all depends. Like I'm just giving you examples. I don't have like, this has to be that. It's like I just feel it and I look at it as a chakra journey.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I think different people will have different experiences, but the intention there is beautiful. And like maybe the lack of words is part of what helps people come out of their thinking mind.
Well, exactly. And too many lyrics then puts people into a conceptual state.
Right.
But I find that some small amount of well-placed, proper lyric, or just a voice sample of somebody saying something is also very powerful because then you're open at that state.
Right. I've heard that a lot with Alan Watts quotes in different people's music. Yeah. Did you ever get to meet him?
I did not.
Maybe he died a little bit before then.
Yeah, he died at a really young age, I think around 57.
Oh, well. So did you study with Trungpa Rinpoche for a while then? Were you part of the community? And
I was, and it wasn't called Shambhala back then. It was called Vajradhatu. And the building downtown was called Karmazong. And so I first studied at in the different cities. They were sort of satellites. It was the Boston Dharmadhatu. And then Tail of the Tiger was a land center that was in Vermont, and later got named as Karme Choling. So I did retreats there, and I studied in the Boston Dharmadhatu. And getting back to that story of I hitchhiked through, because you started out, you asked me how I got to Boulder. I hitchhiked through, when I was a hippie, through Boulder, and then I connected with the Dharma in Boston and the Boston Dharmadhatu. And then the next summer was the summer of 74. And so I came out to Boulder to attend the Naropa Institute for the first summer of Naropa.
oh, cool.
And since I had left college after 2 years, I completed my education at Naropa. So I graduated in 1978, which was the second graduating class of Naropa.
I didn't know that. That's cool.
I have a degree in Buddhist psychology, and that was my major, so to speak. And then I minored in beat poetry because at that time, Allen Ginsberg was here, and then many
wow.
visiting teachers, William Burroughs being probably the most famous one, like Gregory Corso,
Hmm.
Anne Waldman became a resident, and there were Philip Whalen was a Zen poet.
Hmm.
I remember two of his poems, "Dots and squiggles justify the air and space I occupy."
Nice.
And all I bought was all I needed, namely soap.
Pretty good.
So, I just connected with those poets. So that was a very rich
Yeah.
time. And I got to meet and hang out with Allen Ginsberg, and he liked my poems and attended a poetry reading I did. And that was
Oh, that's so cool.
really interesting.
Yeah, it's such an amazing time it seemed like so wild and free. Like it seems like there's more wildness back then, more freedom even.
There was. And they actually had dances, and I wasn't, a DJ at that point, but there were dances, and there was a lot of jumping around, and it was, talk about free form.
So you think people were dancing more energetically, maybe, in general?
Yeah, perhaps spastically in some cases, but it wasn't as much of a path as I see it now. I see ecstatic dance as a journey path.
Yeah. Yeah, I've done some with 5 rhythms, and that's a really powerful kind of dance path.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, there are different forms of it
Right.
that have surfaced and are evolving, and it's continuing to evolve.
Yeah, such a cool thing. You were telling me before we started recording that the first ecstatic dance was in Hawaii?
As I understand it, it was a Sunday morning, I believe, on the Big Island.
Cool.
And I understand it's still going on. And I do know some of my DJ friends have played ecstatic dances in Hawaii, so I know there's a number of them now.
Yeah, sure. It's amazing.
And it's come to Colorado in, I think it was 2006, was when Gypsy Nation first came to Colorado. I first played in January of 2007, and that came about. I was invited to attend a Gypsy Nation event, which was in toward the end of 2006, and I danced, and it was basically there was a mixed tape that was played, and as I was dancing, I was getting into the music, and then all of a sudden it changed in a way where it sort of brought me down, and I saw the energy change. And so they asked me at the end of the dance, they said, Buddha Bomb is here. He's a well-known local DJ, and we'd like to know your feedback. I was a guest. I was on the guest list.
Yeah.
So I said, well, I really enjoyed dancing with everybody tonight. Really appreciate this. This has a lot of potential. I said, but what I see is that it requires a live music, a live DJ, a live band because things change based on how the energy is. And so they said, well, would you like to try it? So I got signed up I'm pretty sure it was in January of 2007 was my first DJ experience. And I prepared for it. I still have the mix somewhere.
Oh, wow.
And then I started DJing every month. I DJ'd the first Tuesday of every month, and then I also scheduled other DJ friends of mine, and there were some bands. Tribal Electra was kind of this electric acoustic band with Paul Temple and Ariana Saraha, and they played there, and then later Lunar Fire, which came out of...
Oh, yeah, I've seen them.
Yeah, the Canal, which was sort of a shaman band that I was connected with. And it became a live DJ and band experience, the ecstatic dance in Boulder. And Gypsy Nation went for several years, and then some things happened. and the name got transformed to Rhythm Sanctuary, and then a sister dance of Gypsy Nation in Denver also became Rhythm Sanctuary. So there were two Rhythm Sanctuary
Huh.
dances, one in Boulder and one in Denver. And after about 4 years, the one in Boulder ended just because some people moved away and also had babies and different life things happened. And so Rhythm Sanctuary in Denver continued to thrive, and it's still
It's still
going
going.
on.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's still going. It's an amazing event. There's usually about 100 people there. It's incredible.
There's
Something like
was
that.
quite a few more than that the last time
More?
I played.
Oh,
I would say in the more closer to 400 people.
really?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. There's at
I'm not-
least 200 people go
yeah.
to the dances, and I don't count them, but the room is a big
The room
room,
is
and
very
it's
packed.
very packed,
Yeah.
and it's a lot of fun. Ava Lene is the primary facilitator,
Yeah, she's great.
and she does a wonderful job. And there's a DJ rotation. I play there every several months, sometimes 3 or 4 months in between because there's so many different acts, but it's just a wonderful experience.
Yeah. Well, I think you made a good point about having a live, living person there playing the music, even if they are mostly just pushing play. They're still choosing what song. They're feeling the energy in the room. Maybe
That-
you could speak to that a little bit because I think for me and probably for other people, it's a little bit confusing sometimes when you see an artist. You don't always know what's their original music or what they're playing from someone else. And
Well, I approach it of I'm spending most of my time is in figuring out what I'm going to do next. And part of how I decide to do that is feeling what the audience is feeling, what the participants are feeling. And if I'm sensing they need to go, um, they need more bass, they need more solar plexus chakra, I will go into a bass riff for several tracks. And when I get to the heart chakra, sometimes I feel like we need to stay there or we need to move on. So it's just I can't exactly describe it because I approach the set where I have a body of music and I have sort of a very rough outline of the set, but it never comes out exactly the way my outline does or how I practice it because things change and I have different feelings and I realize, oh, I know what's required right now. I know what they want to hear. And I will change it. The last 2 sets I did were about 60% what I had prepared and about 40% of improv tracks.
Oh, cool.
And sometimes I will be playing something and it's not working out so well, or I'll play something, say, with a little Middle Eastern riff, and I see how much it affects the people, and then I might play another track or two along those lines.
So you're very attuned, really feeling the crowd, feeling people.
That's what I pay attention to. That's where I focus. People, I pay more attention to that than sort of the technical dynamics of DJing, where some DJs are, very talented and they are doing all kinds of effects and things, and I do some of that, but I'm more, especially in the ecstatic dance, I'm focused on the dancers. And for me, they form the dance. And sometimes people say, well, that was incredible. And I say, yeah, thank you for dancing and for being, you help evolve it. So it's
a real collaboration. It's a real, I feel that often at a concert, like the people there make it up as much as the musicians, it's all.
We're all interconnected.
Right.
And I can never do a set like that in my studio. It's never happened. I actually tried a few times, and I can't do it. It has to be with dancers, and that's where it becomes, where it's interchangeable, where I'm getting feedback, and I see the joy that they have, and then I realize sometimes just what's needed next, and it's never follows a pattern. It's always fresh, and it's always like I get surprised. I've said, boy, I had no idea
Mm.
I was going to play like 4 or 5 of those tracks at least, is what happens. So for me, it's a very living, dynamic situation to where the improv is just as important as the preparation, and I spend a lot of time preparing the tracks.
Yeah. Well, you must spend a lot of time just listening to music too, right?
I do. I do. And I would say I sometimes will listen to 100 tracks before there's one that I will play,
Oh, wow.
because I'm very selective. And
Mm.
my primary formula is I play the music that I love.
Mm.
And my theory is if I love it this much, other people are going to love it as well.
Yeah. I like that. That's beautiful. Um, and how are you? Are you like constantly looking for new music?
Always.
Yeah.
Always. I'm swimming through oceans of music, and I'm always hungry for it, and I'll never have enough.
Nice.
I have 20,000 CDs. Next
Right.
10 years from now, I'll have 30,000, and I still buy music, so I'm old-fashioned that way, but I buy the CDs. There's a website. It's called Discogs,
Huh.
as in discography, discogs.com, and it has the discography of almost every artist that's out there. So it'll have their first albums, through their current albums, and then there's a link where you can look up information on any particular album, and then it has sellers all around the world who will be selling that album. So it's not like Amazon where it's one company that's got an inventory. You're buying it from independent sellers.
Nice.
So I purchase music from people from Israel, Greece, India, Germany, and Japan, all over the world. And it's also fun where you get into, there's like an email thread where you say, they will ask you if I want insurance on the shipping or how fast I want it. And so you get into a dialogue with the people. So it's much more human than just purchasing, like the way the online experience, you just click, 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 click,
Right.
and then it shows up. Like
Right.
it's more interaction. So I love Discogs, and that's where there's, a lot of stories I have of what I got into conversations and why I chose the music I do. So I get most of my music from Discogs.
That's cool to hear. So most of the music you're getting is the physical CD and not a download.
Yeah, and I do it opposite. Some DJs buy the music digitally and then they burn it onto CD, and then they play it off of CDJs, which are the professional CD players. I do it opposite, where I buy the original CDs and then I convert it into digital, and then I play it through a laptop with a MIDI controller and software. I use Ableton Live mostly for DJing.
Cool.
So there's a lot of different ways to do music these days. There's a lot of technology.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you peeling back the veil a little bit of how it's all made, because it's mysterious, like you see the DJs up there and you don't know what they're doing always. But
Well, they're different DJs. Some of them have original music that they've produced, and they do what's more called live PA, where they're playing bits and pieces of their music that they're mixing together live in some cases.
Yep. Yeah.
So there's a lot of different ways to do it, and that's the wonderful thing about it.
Yeah. Well, it's with the amazing growth of our technology and all the artists out there, it's becoming more, I guess there's no one way to do anything anymore. I mean, there's just so many ways that you can go about it. And
Yeah. Well, and interestingly enough, the acoustic bands use the same software. It's called DAWs, digital audio workstations. So Ableton Live, Logic, Pro Tools, those are some of the more well-known ones. Fruity Loops is another one. But there's different ones that different producers will use, and sometimes they'll use more than one because they get maybe certain sounds or certain beats from one, but then they want to master it. Pro Tools and Logic have very powerful sound engines. But acoustic bands use the same software, where they will have, electronic music. You have different clips, different tracks that you mix together on different channels. It's called sequencing. And And acoustic songs these days use the same software. So to some degree,
Interesting.
all recorded music today is electronic music, even if it's
Right.
the sounds are acoustically based.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, it's all coming together, and I've been making some music on Ableton and trying to bring in live improv guitar with it, and it's fun to play with that. And the interplay between the more automatic or kind of machine elements and the more human, live instrumentation it's an interesting place to be in.
It is, and electronic music has evolved, and people used to say there were a lot of people who resisted electronic music and say it's all canned. Well, there's a lot of heart in it, and there's a lot of effort, and there's a lot of intention, and there's a lot of beauty, and you can make all sorts of incredible sounds because
Yeah.
you have filtering and different methodologies to alter the sound, and the nuance of a beat can actually sometimes producers will spend days on just one kick drum, for example, and just
Right.
getting the kick exactly right. So there's a lot of effort that goes into it. It's not just pressing buttons.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting for me to think about. I used to think that way too, like kind of like machines or robots on one side and like humans or like life on the other side. And I just see it now more and more coming together. And like even my own like heartbeat, like I don't control that. I mean, in some sense, we are kind of biological machines, at least to some degree. And then and then these machines that we're creating are speaking with us and it's all interconnected. It all kind of
It is interconnected.
yeah. I mean, if a human builds a computer, we can't really say the computer is totally separate from us.
It's all created by
So
mind.
there you go. Yeah.
Everything is created by mind,
Mm.
and especially music. But music is on a dimension that's not exactly the physical plane. It's interesting with sound waves, you can see the sound, but you can't touch it in the same way you can touch a table and a chair.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
something that goes through you, and that's something where I realized the power that it has to alter consciousness because it brings us into other dimensions.
Yeah. And I think it helps us to feel connected, like we've been talking about. Like if you're with a group of people all listening to the same music, there's this possibility of feeling really connected.
Well, it is, and it gets back to that entrainment I was talking about, where everyone gets entrained, where their body gets synchronized to the beat, the breathing, the movement, and that there is the ability for people to feel more connected with each other on the dance floor, and it happens
Mm.
organically that way because we're all getting entrained to the same rhythm patterns and the same beats, and it's very powerful. And I've seen it, at the ecstatic dances, especially where people are there for a dance journey, and the ecstatic dances are usually just several hours long, and there's not a lot of coming and going. It's not like, when playing at a bar or something like that, people
Right.
go outside and they smoke or they do this and that. It's the ecstatic dance. Everybody's there for experience. It's there, happening at a finite amount of time. And most of the people are there on the dance floor for the entire experience. And
Yep.
I find it, as well as other DJs who I've talked to, find it to be a much more satisfying experience than many other DJ experiences because you're able to bring them on a journey where everybody hears your whole set.
Right. Absolutely. It makes so much sense to me. And another piece of it is often you're not supposed to talk on the dance floor at an ecstatic dance,
That's
or at least
a
the ones.
rule or a guideline or a law, depending on how it wants to be expressed. But the idea is that you want to get out of your normal conceptual mind of just chatter or gossip or just talking idly, and you want to have a deeper experience. And sometimes people might be in a dark place, or they might be sad, they lost their job, they relationship fell apart, they're having difficulty, and it's a movement meditation that has a lot of power where you can gain perspective on your life and you can maybe see through sort of the duality that you're creating on the dance floor. So I see it as being a very positive experience. And for many people, even going back to the days of raves, where the dance floor was the closest thing to a spiritual, or religious experience that they had, where people have rejected conventional churches and so on. And
they found something amazing, something blissful, something different.
The days of rave affected a lot of people in a way to where they realized their own humanity through the dance. So even I see it as a evolution, because there were substances involved in many of the dance experiences. Like disco, for example, there was a lot of alcohol and a lot of cocaine. On the rave, it's known that ecstasy was a primary drug of choice. The psychedelic trance festivals, which started in Goa, India, and then morphed all around the world, starting in the early 90s, started with the VU Festival in Germany, and very big in Israel, and many countries around the world. LSD and mushrooms and DMT were the drugs of choice. And it's evolved to now where there's sound healings, yoga classes, ecstatic dances, where the music is the drug. And the music itself has the power to put people into the altered states. So I see it as electronic music has evolved to where we don't need to rely on substances, that just being together, dancing together on the dance floor is the drug, so to speak.
I love that. Yeah, that's a great message. I think it's true. Yeah. Well, I think a lot of the indigenous cultures that they would use drumming and whatnot, like what you were speaking of, with shamans to alter consciousness, they didn't need to use a lot of substances all the time.
No, they didn't. And there were times when they did, certainly peyote ceremonies, and there were substances that were used in different cultures. But also in the African dance, it was the drum beat. It is the heartbeat. It represents the heartbeat. It represents our humanity. And that is kind of the ground of our being that we experience, that we can experience the reality through. And, there's a time and a place, people that take those ayahuasca journeys and so on. And I believe there's a time and a place for people. And I follow maybe the Terence McKenna line of thought that it's up to us to decide on our own consciousness journeys.
So we should have that freedom to choose.
We have that freedom to choose. It's not, widely accepted in the culture, but there's maybe a little bit more openness and return to it where, just to use an example, there's been a number of people, I know Stanislav Grof and other people, who have used the psychedelic experience to assist people with terminal illnesses to have a different perspective and to be able to get to that place of acceptance much sooner. And psilocybin mushrooms it's now legal for certain doctors to prescribe that to people who have terminal illnesses to facilitate a journey so that they can get a perspective and, in some cases, overcome their fear of death, for example.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think we are making progress as a society, and I think from what I've heard, in the next 3 to 5 years, like MDMA is on its way to being a prescription medication for therapists. And
certainly to get rid of, addictions, alcohol, cigarette addiction, cocaine addiction can be facilitated through things like MDMA experience, to where people get a perspective on their life and realize that they don't need to live as a slave to their habituals, patterns like that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then I think some people are, like for myself, like going to ecstatic dance can be, like you were talking about, a way of um, gaining those experiences maybe without the use of substances all the time. It can, I don't know, I think it could be a good bridge for people, a way to integrate, a way to have a grounded, connected experience.
It is.
Yeah. So are you still meditating? Is that still part of your life?
Very much so. Yeah. And it's a way to connect with myself, to see what's really important. I've had different teachers. I did study with Trungpa Rinpoche. I also studied with Khandro Rinpoche pretty
Yeah.
intensely for many years. And she made a strong point about our actions, about, she said, examine every action that we take and how we take it. Like, look at how you walk down the street, how you introduce yourself to people, how you move, and that everything you do affects everything else. And I think that gets back to the interconnectivity and the ethics and the awareness that you can bring to every situation does affect everyone else. And so I take that teaching to heart.
Yeah. That is beautiful. That's a good message. Maybe easier to say than to do. But yeah, it just makes me think about, like, I am making a point to try to leave earlier for appointments and meetings and things. So I'm not rushing, because then when I'm rushing, I'm putting out this kind of energy in the world, or cutting someone, I don't want to be cutting someone off in traffic, for example.
Right.
That kind of
Hurry up,
thing.
hurry up to meditate.
Right. Yeah. I don't want to hurry. But yeah, bringing it into our lives, our lived experiences.
Yeah. So, the teaching, the way I understood it from her, was to really examine every moment, every situation we're in, and to really look at it of how to be and how to act and how to talk, and to really look at it in a critical way. And, I'm certainly far from being a saint or anything like that, but I do remember that teaching at all times. And it's extremely important to, it's not that meditation, you're just disassociated and having all these psychedelic experiences, and then you can go and do harm to people. That doesn't really quite work. It's putting it all together to where the concern is for others, how to help others at all times.
Yeah. Beautiful. I guess one question that I have while I have you here, it's been a theme or a topic that's come up a lot on this podcast, has been around gurus and teachers, and there's been so many scandals. Do you have any thoughts on that, on having a spiritual teacher, or has that been a big part of your journey?
Yeah. I'm just curious to the recording there. Is that?
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's the current. I see. Okay. Okay, well, it's true. There are a number of scandals, and I don't know the exact details of most of them. However, what I do know is that karma is something that's very real, but it's nothing that can be exactly defined, and that we're all in a situation where everything we do affects everything else, especially ourselves. And that what the point seems to be is to live ethically and live with awareness. And that meditation teaches us to be present, to be aware, and to look at each situation critically. And I don't really want to comment on specific situations, but I believe that some of the teachers, even though that they've been taught these things, have maybe just fallen into mistakes of not considering others as much as they should. One of the teachers that inspired me the most in history is Longchenpa, and he was an incredible intellect and an enlightened person. And he used to travel from town to town, and the poor people would make offerings, and they didn't have much to offer. But he would just show everybody such kindness wherever he went. So that is inspiring to me, that we actually can be kind to everyone, that we can do what we can to help people rather than looking at it of what we can do to take from people. So I am doing my best to live my life like that, and when I talk to people who are depressed and I find out what it is, I tell them to not worry about themselves so much, but to worry about other people, and that it changes their perspective.
Yeah, that's a great message. If we put our awareness, our care on others, we can kind of get out of our own shit a little bit more.
Yeah, and I don't believe that anybody has the right to abuse or do harm to other people. Now, that being said, there's famous stories of teachers slapping a student, and then them achieving enlightenment at that moment. So I'm not being judgmental about that, but I would say that I'm against any kind of abuse towards any person or animals or the environment. And I don't really see a lot of good happening out of what I would consider abuse. And
yeah, definitely not.
And like I said, I wasn't there for these situations that these scandals are about, so I don't really know. And I'm also against anybody covering up for any abuse that they've seen. And we saw in the conventional world at Penn State where there was, this one person who was a pedophile who abused the boys.
Football coach or something, yeah.
Yeah, he was one of the assistant football coaches, and then, he's in jail, prison for the rest of his life for doing that. But Joe Paterno, who was the head football coach, his crime was not reporting. And he had heard these things, and, really the police needed to be called. So sweeping things under the rug and not reporting it is also
not good.
Not good, and shouldn't be tolerated. And I would say that about some of these scandals, that's a lot of why there's anger, because the feeling that the organizations refuse to acknowledge some of the abuses that happen. So I'm against all abuse, and I'm against the covering up of all abuse.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm with you 100% on that. I think you made a good point. Like, there are all these stories of a master doing something that seems abusive, but then the person wakes up, like, especially in the Zen tradition, they'll like chop off an arm or something and the person becomes enlightened. But generally speaking, those seem to be, I haven't met anyone in real life who has an example of something quite like that, so I don't know if I'm recommending it.
Yeah. Well, you have to be there, I guess.
I guess you have to be there.
But, there's a famous story of Talopa, and I think he slapped Naropa in the face with a fish.
I thought it was a sandal.
Well, there was that. Okay, that was a final thing, but yeah.
Oh, a fish.
But a sandal, yeah. I think that was true. That was maybe the final breakthrough in having him endure hardships and things like that. Well, we live in a different culture, and it's important that we treat our children properly and that we treat each other properly.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Okay, thank you, Julian. It's been
great to have you.
Well, thanks for doing the podcast. It's important that we get stories and different perspectives out there. And I appreciate your role of just finding out what people want to talk about.
Yeah, I found that when we can talk with someone for a longer time, like the podcast can do, then something like really magical can happen. Often the last half of the conversation is like the best part.
Okay. Well, I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for listening. If you would like to support this show, even $1 or $2 makes a big difference. Visit patreon.com/astateofmind. For show notes and more information, visit astateofmindplay.com. And to learn more about my work as a therapist, meditation teacher, and coach, visit my personal site, julianocean.us. Signing out for now, and wishing all of you a wonderful day.
Come on.